programs for a country of the size and scope that this one, that ours is rather limited. It's still a good period of contraction, and there is a period of contraction right now. There won't be as many non-profits by the end of this year that there are now, and we won't see the growth of new non-profits in the same way as we have seen in the past. In the past, it was 70,000 new non-profits every single year. We'll see what happens at the end of this year, and we'll only know next year, but we'll see what happens. But I think that one of the things that worries me is that as organizations try and save jobs, what they are doing is cutting off travel budgets, cutting subscriptions, cutting conferences, cutting meetings, cutting collaborations. And what happens to you when you operate in isolation? You don't thrive, you don't learn, you don't compete, you don't know what the other guy's doing. And that in that kind of circumstance, when that happens, you don't move forward. I told a story this morning in the little meeting that I had, again about from my childhood experience. This isn't childhood, this is young adulthood. In South Africa they've always had a fantastic wine industry. The grapes are right, the land is right, the sun is right, it all kind of works together. And before the sanctions movement happened, that industry was one of the best industries in the world and used to win all the awards. And then with all of our efforts to make sure that nobody could do trade with them, they weren't invited to any of those international wine competitions for about 25 years. And then in 1994, when trade opened up to them again because they'd thrown out apartheid and installed Nelson Mandela, they went to the first competition and they were about 150th on the list. They had lost their standard. And that wasn't because their wine had declined, the quality of the wine had declined. It's that it hadn't moved, it had stayed in the same place, and everybody else's had gone forward because of competition, technology, contact, all of those sorts of things. And so we don't always know the degree to which speaking with others, finding out what others are doing, stimulates our own thinking, whether we're admitted to them or not. It's nice if you do, but even if you don't, on the way back home thinking about, oh, I could do that. Oh, I could do it even better than they do. Oh, they think that's a good idea, but that it stimulates your thinking in a different kind of a way. And that's, in fact, what we need. First and foremost, I think, in order for us to do our work and to do it successfully, we need human capital. We need strong, smart, connected individuals committed to carrying out and advancing our shared goals. So for all of you who are easily able to switch to other sectors, let me say to you here and now that we need strong, smart, connected people who are interested in making our society a better society. And even though we don't always pay the highest rates, and even though we make people work much longer than anybody should reasonably work, in the end, if what we're producing is something much larger than ourselves, then I think it's worth taking a detour for a decade or two before you decide to go someplace else. What we need is next, in addition to human capital, are the organizations through which we can fulfill our aspirations, missions, and the purpose of our work. And none of that is possible without capital. And where are we in that particular world right now? I'd suggest to you that even though nobody went to that side of the room, Meg, I'm sorry that you were so lonesome over there. I am here to tell you, unfortunately, that the nonprofit community, with all of its diversity, with all of its creativity, with all of its protecting the environment, advancing knowledge, and so on, are facing in many ways the gravest problems that it has faced in the past 50 years or longer. I say 50 because we weren't recording before, so I would just be making it up before then. Most of the sources of funding to the charitable sector are in a contractual frame. That's not true for government funding. Government is the biggest growth industry, which is, I guess, why some people will say, well, you know, Diana, that is also serving a public purpose, and don't be so mean about our leaving the charitable sector. Well, we've got to have some good people left here so that we hold government accountable, don't you think? Now, it's true that if you look at the economic stimulus package and the hundreds of billions that will be flowing to nonprofit organizations at the state and local level, some national, but mostly state and local, that those organizations over the next 2 years will fare much better. It also creates all kinds of complications because there may be a massive expansion for 2 years and then what? And I'm not sure that the economic recovery will have been felt by those organizations by that time. It may take a lot longer to go there. But first things first, there is funding flowing from the federal government, and I suspect that we are likely at some point to seek at least discussion on a subsequent stimulus package, and in addition to a stimulus package, we are likely to see funding through the federal budget as well. That will be quite significant. But outside of that, 47 out of the 50 states have state deficits, budget deficits. And the problem with the states is they can't simply just borrow more money. They, all but one state, have a constitutional amendment that they must balance the budget each and every year. So it means that they either raise taxes, raise revenue, or they decrease spending. And so most of them are doing that. And this stimulus package was never intended to fill anything more than a third of those states' budgets. And so we see that because of that, that there are lots of health and human service organizations that have contracts with state governments, and the governments are simply not paying those contracts. So that the people have already incurred the expenses, these organizations, they have employees on staff, and the money's not coming in. In the state of California, some of those organizations have received IOUs from Sacramento. I don't know what you do with an IOU. I don't think you can buy bread with it. Also, if you look at individual giving, it's down. Endowment funds are down somewhere between 25 and 40%, which means that how much they will pay out will be limited. And many of those organizations, many foundations, although the vast majority are not, many of them are saying we will keep it at last year's levels, but that there's no way that in 2010 we're going to be able to do that. So that's going to be a big problem, I think, for this community. And to add to that, the basic demand for nonprofit services has skyrocketed while this overall funding has decreased. I would say to you that the overall funding direction of our organizations right now has placed an enormous stress on these organizations and call for the kind of creative, innovative leadership that you can bring in your respective positions to encourage this organization that you work with to think about doing things differently. Business as usual is out. Now, you may have thought that long before the economic crisis, but now you will have a lot of executives who work like me at the level that I do, who will be interested in the kinds of solutions that you have in mind. So this is the time for creativity and innovation. Let me say also that in addition to the crisis that we face with all of this, just very quickly, that this government and this administration in particular has moved quite quickly to provide some help in a variety of ways. And I will just mention one, that if you think that the president has just hit his 100th day, or he's round about his first 100 days around now, and just last Tuesday, this past Tuesday, I had the privilege of being with him at the Seed School in downtown DC, in northeast DC, in which he signed the Serve America Act, the Edward Kennedy Serve America Act, that's providing opportunities not only through the Corporation for National and Community Service, but also there will be a volunteer generation fund that authorizes $360 million to assist nonprofit, faith-based, and other civic organizations expand their supply of volunteers. There's a social innovation fund. There's a nonprofit capacity building initiative. They thought of lots of different things. And while the money, and in Q&A I'm happy to tell you more about these, but while the money to these programs